Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. I'm a former journalist who's now using this show to uncover amazing and insightful stories simply through asking questions, while also giving you an example of what it means to listen more than you speak so that you can become a more thoughtful and informed person. On the Follow-Up Question podcast, I'll talk to some of the best interviewers I know to get their perspective on what it means to ask amazing questions. I'll also interview people from all different backgrounds and perspectives who have amazing stories to tell, and I'll bring those stories to you by asking thoughtful, logical questions. Whether you're a journalist, a podcaster yourself, a blogger, someone who wants to learn how to be quick to listen and slow to speak, or someone who just likes to hear great stories, this is the show for you. And welcome to the inaugural episode of The Follow-Up Question. As I mentioned, I'm a former journalist and somebody who just absolutely loves telling stories and hearing stories and asking questions. Asking questions is in my education. It's in my blood. It's what I love to do. And I'm excited to bring you guys this show and bring you not only amazing stories, like I mentioned, but hopefully give you an example of what it means to ask really thoughtful, relevant, on-topic questions that dig below the surface, that dig a little bit deeper so that you can become better informed. And I think that's what's missing in our society right now. There's a lack of people who seek to be more informed about an issue, a topic, a belief that they hold. We are all such a society of headline readers and tweet readers and Facebook post readers, and rarely do we take the time to dig in and ask the next logical question. And this is what I've set out to do here on this show, is ask the next logical question about a lot of different topics. There's not going to be any one theme. I just want to tell amazing stories and ask lots of questions and sit back and listen to what my guests have to say here on this show. And hopefully along the way, you'll learn a little something yourself. I know I will. I absolutely know I will from each and every guest. So a little bit about my background. I said I was a journalist. This was over 10 years ago now since I left the journalism world to begin a career in marketing and sales in the software space, but I've never lost touch with those roots. I've always been interested in telling stories, whether that was in marketing to tell the stories of customers and a company to grow and scale a business, or even back to when I was a journalist, it was telling people stories in a way that connected the reader to who they were as a human being, who the subject of the story was, what drove them. I came from the world of sports, and that in particular, we have a connection with athletes that we watch, or we want to form a connection with athletes that we watch, whether we're live and in person at an event or a game, or whether we're watching the highlights on TV and we see that person. Sports has this way of bringing people in, and with most athletes, there is some sort of underlying story. And that was always my goal as a journalist, as a sports journalist, was to tell those underlying stories. Especially in today's world with social media, you can find out a game score or a story about a game within seconds. Not even after the game is over, you can follow along the game right there on your phone, follow Twitter updates, follow your news feed, follow the scoreboard on ESPN. You can watch the game from your phone. So understanding what happened in the game for a writer and a journalist, recapping the game or the event really doesn't have a lot of weight anymore. It's becoming kind of a dying brand of journalism. But when we talk about uncovering the stories and going deeper inside the minds, the plays, the experiences of those athletes, and by extension, what I aim to do here on the show is of every guest, and this is not going to be a sports show. We may have athletes on here, but the aim is always to understand what makes people tick. Who are they? How did their experiences and their upbringing and the things that they have gone through mold and shape their worldview and their perspectives and their actions? I want to tell those stories simply by asking questions. I want to remove my opinion out of my interviews. I want to keep that as distant from my conversations as possible and just let the person's story come to light through their words. My job is to guide the conversation by simply asking the follow-up question. the next logical question that comes to mind. I used to have, when I was a sports writer, I used to cover a coach who always harped on his team and told his team constantly, make the next easiest pass or make the next easiest play. He was a basketball coach, and his goal with telling his team that and drilling that into their heads over and over and over again was to let them know that as a team, we are going to succeed if we are constantly looking for the next play that is going to provide us an easier shot at the basket. So ditch the high risk, high reward, highlight reel play in favor of the next easiest pass or the next easiest play. You're going to have a much higher chance of winning, of succeeding when you drill the fundamentals, when you can pass appropriately, rebound, guard appropriately. And a lot of these are sports metaphors. I understand. And like I said, this is not going to be a sports show. But that is the idea of what it means to ask the next logical question. Ask the next question that logically comes to mind through the flow of the conversation. That is what we so fail to do, from my perspective, as a society in whole, is we ask questions either to provide our opinion within the question itself, or we ask questions simply as a bridge to get to our next chance to speak. And for me, and what I hope to do is set an example of what it means to just simply ask a question and have that question be, and let the subject tell you their opinions, their thoughts, their experiences. And in that, I think we can understand each other better. We can learn more about each other better. We can learn more about a topic better when somebody who has experienced it for themselves and gives you their perspective tells you the story without the narrative from me as the person asking the question. The reason I called this podcast and my website the follow-up question stems from when I was a journalism student at Kansas State University. I had a professor, his name was Fred Brock, and he taught our interviewing course, our interviewing class. And one day he brought in to class a tape recording. Yes, this was mid-2000s. We're still talking about tape recorders. He brought in a tape recording of an interview that he had done with Fred Phelps. And yes, that is the Fred Phelps of Westboro Baptist Church infamy. My professor, Fred Brock, had a chance to sit down and interview Fred Phelps, the founder of that hate group. And his goal with bringing in that interview and having us listen to it, he said, was listen to every time I ask a question, an initial question to start a particular part of the conversation. You can hear in Fred Phelps's answers the very polished, the very pre-thought out answers to those questions. Any interviewer will tell you that when you interview someone, it's not like an interview just springs up out of the blue. They know that you're going to interview them. Oftentimes, these are scheduled for weeks. They probably have a good idea of the types of questions that you're going to ask them based on who they are or what the interview might be about. But it's in those moments where you ask the follow-up questions where the unscripted, real, authentic answers come to light. And my professor, Fred Brock, when he played that interview for us, we listened, and every initial question that Fred Brock asked Fred Phelps, you could hear that it was the answers were tame. They were not hate-filled. They were not extreme in their views of different people. They were very, very polished and well thought out answers. But when our professor started asking the follow-up questions, that's where Fred Phelps went off script. And you could hear it every single time in that interview transcript or that interview recording that was played that day in class. The follow-up questions gave you so much background and insight into who Fred Phelps really was and what he really believed. You heard it. You heard the hate. You heard the worldview. You heard the twisted mentality. in the answers to those follow-up questions. It resonated so much with me that all these years later, that is why I have chosen to name this podcast The Follow-Up Question. That is the example that I go by when I think about how important it is to ask the next logical question, to get to the real, authentic, genuine, unscripted answers. And so why asking questions is so important? It's so that we stop and ask a question the next time we read a headline or a tweet or a Facebook post, or the next time somebody in our friends group or in our family says something that perhaps seems off, or you just want more information about it. To stop taking these things at face value and asking the next question. And that's what you can expect here with the Follow-Up Question podcast. That I'm going to have guests on here, either who are interviewers themselves, and I want to dig into their interviewing style and how they ask questions and how they prepare to talk to their subjects so we can learn from others. My way is not the end-all be-all. So I want to learn from other people, and I want to present them to you on this show. So I'm going to be digging into my past, into my network of former journalists and current journalists and professors, and I want to bring to light all of these different perspectives of interviewing and asking questions and listening. But then I also want to just bring in amazing people who have really cool stories to tell that I want to help bring to light in whatever medium I can. I happen to choose this podcast, but I want to bring them to light, and I want to be the conduit. I want to be the platform to help get these messages and these perspectives out there so that we can become more informed about really important topics. We're going to go all over the place on this show. I do not have a niche that I want to fit into in terms of the topics that I want to bring on this show. I just want to tell amazing stories. So that is what you can expect here. I'll also do Q&A episodes from time to time. I'll bring you solo episodes where I talk about a particular topic as it pertains to podcasting or interviewing or how to ask great questions or how to get better at interviewing. With so many podcasters springing up day in and day out and so many podcasts being put out there into the ethos, I think it's really important to help educate people who have never done something like this before on what it means to be a great host and be a great interviewer. So I want to help in that way as a former journalist and as somebody who's been doing a podcast for a really long time. I have been podcasting in other avenues, in other topics and niches for a long time. And this is a new venture for me because I genuinely do believe in the power of great questions. That is what you can expect here on the Follow-Up Question, and that is what I commit to bring to you with each and every episode. So this is the kickoff episode. I am really excited about this. If you can't tell, this gets me fired up. I thank you for listening, and I hope that you subscribe and tune in and listen to each and every episode, and that it gives you value. And you're going to find out as I go along here, I really don't like cliches. I don't like cliches in the podcasting world. It's cliche to ask for reviews, and I can't stand cliche questions, and I don't like cliche answers, which is why we ask follow-up questions, right? But honestly, reviews do help all of your favorite podcasters, not just me, continue to do what they do and reach more people. So if you have it in your heart, subscribe to this show, and please, as we go along here, I know this is episode 1 that you're listening to, but as we go along, if you feel so inclined, leave a rating and review of this show wherever you might be listening. And if you know someone who you would think would be a great guest on the Follow-Up Question, or if you have a question you'd like me to address on a future episode, you can always email me, michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or go to thefollowupquestion.com/contact and submit a guest recommendation there. If you want to improve your own ability to listen and ask questions, hop over to thefollowupquestion.com/newsletter and subscribe to the Follow-Up Question newsletter. And when you do, I'll send you my free guide, the 10 follow-up questions guaranteed to keep a conversation going. You'll also be the first to know about new content and fresh tips and tricks, and that's all free when you subscribe at thefollowupquestion.com/newsletter. All those links that I just mentioned, they're in the show notes, one-click access to those. So until next time, I'll catch you on the next episode of the follow-up question. Keep asking questions.